Welcome to the Star Chamber. I'm Ryan Swayze, a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and the founder and president of the Walk the Talk Foundation, a nonprofit that advocates for and advises currently serving and former military service members going through the arduous journey of administrative processes and investigations in our government.
And I am Francesca Graham, a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Advisor for the Walk the Talk Foundation. For all our returning guests, welcome back. And for our new listeners, thank you for tuning in. Before we begin this week's topic, please do not forget to hit that subscribe button, check out our Walk the Talk Foundation website, and hit that donate button if you think we're doing a good job. Also, check out our newsletter, the DoD Times Redacted, on all the socials, including LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Facebook. Links in the description. All right, Star Chamber listeners, let's get started. Welcome back, Star Chamber listeners, to another awesome episode of the Star Chamber. Today we have a very special guest, a retired Air Force NCO, non-commissioned officer, Mr. Chris McGee. So Chris served 20 years in the United States Air Force as an F-16 crew chief.
Cool.
In the final year of his career, and actually Ryan says that's cool. If you guys don't remember, Ryan was an F-16 pilot. And if I recall, Chris, you actually did maintenance on some of Ryan's planes, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did maintenance on his assigned aircraft, which, as Ryan knows, you don't necessarily fly because of the way that it was set up. But I'm also fairly certain, just because of all the time I was working, I'm pretty sure I launched and recovered Ryan as well during his time at the unit.
That's cool as hell.
That is actually really, really cool. So in the final year of his career, he became a whistleblower after discovering that a potentially unfit jury member had been seated on a court-martial. Though he had no connection to the accused, he presented evidence to protect the integrity of the military justice system. His actions came at significant personal risk and led to reprisal from his chain of command. In 2024, Chris founded the Falcon Forward Law Group, a veterans disability firm. As both a former maintainer and an attorney, he represents fellow veterans navigating the VA claims process with the same tenacity that defined his military career. Before we get started, well, two things. First of all, I just wanted to thank Chris up front for having both Ryan and I on his podcast, the 20 Years Done podcast. I think Ryan was on his podcast about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago maybe, and then I was on his podcast about a year ago, when I was actually still in the Army. So really appreciate, Chris, the opportunity to appear on your podcast. And for all the Poindexters in the world, opinions and views expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not represent the official policies, positions, or endorsements of the United States Air Force or any government entity. This discussion is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as reflecting the official stance of any military or governmental organization. And Chris might also do a little bit of disclaimer at the end, but just because he is a lawyer, we're going to say this. Nothing that he says here constitutes legal advice. These are Chris's personal stories, and they do not constitute legal advice. So Chris, welcome to the show. Oh, wait, Ryan, I forgot. Gosh.
Before we go, and maybe one day we'll get a guest to say this, but just for all the Poindexters out there, suck it.
Suck it, Poindexters. Thank you. How could I? Oh my gosh, I almost forgot.
It's all right. We're rusty, but we got it.
No,
that
we're
was the
good.
Most important disclaimer.
It was the most important one.
All of you.
So, Chris, over to you, sir. What did we miss? And please give us a little bit of background on yourself. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think you captured essentially the gist of what we're going to kind of focus on in this episode. And obviously, I've had a lot of different things kind of going on, moving from maintenance to law and the advocacy work I've done. But, with your guys' work at Walk the Talk Foundation, obviously my experience with reprisal and retaliation for whistleblower, coupled with what I thought was the ineffectiveness, either through incompetence or malfeasance of the IG, seemed to fall directly into the court of what this podcast and your organization was. So I figured let's camp out in that area and kind of talk about maybe my expectations of what it should have been. And then in retrospect, because now that I'm 8 years removed from this incident, which seems like much, much longer than, because it still seems pretty fresh in my mind. And in fairness, though, I also documented it extensively, both in the moment and then afterwards through my blog. So, and yeah, like you said, nothing should be construed as legal advice. And frankly, based on my experience with this, don't do anything that I did. It all ended up terrible. So no advice of any kind.
So give us a little bit of more background on your career. So you were an F-16 maintainer. I remember listening to one of your previous podcasts with another fellow military podcaster. You had a pretty spicy childhood growing up. You were told, "Oh, you're never going to amount to anything," and you said, "To heck with you people, I'm going to be awesome." And so you joined the Air Force, and for I think when we met, I was pretty impressed. I think you're what, about 6'5" or so, and you're weaseling your way around in these tiny engine compartments of F-16s because that makes sense. It's just so you have this very unique, interesting career background. So just kind of walk us through that a little bit prior to this scenario, which is the main point of talking on the show.
Yeah, so I would say it's better that Ryan's learning about this now instead of when I was crewing his jet. But I like growing up, I was not mechanically inclined at all whatsoever. Like if I got a flat tire on my front tire, I would take off the rim and I would get it like the tube repaired. But if I got a flat tire on my back rim, I couldn't figure out how to get the chain off and all the other sorts of things. So the gears, I'd be like, well, that bike doesn't work anymore. Just cast it aside.
Perfect.
And in fact, even when I was working F-16s, like, yeah, you're right. Like, A, I'm a giant, and B, I got giant person hands, and like trying to get in some, like the F-16, even though it's a jet, it's a relatively small jet, and everything is very, very, very compact and positioned in such a way that when you have giant hands and maybe easily frustrated, like those two things kind of come together to make doing the actual hands-on maintenance not ideal. But where I really made my money in my career and where I tend to shine was in my troubleshooting, which kind of checks out because as a lawyer or as an advocate, you're troubleshooting. That's what we're doing every single day. Like, what's the root cause and what's causing it? What are the variables and how do we account for those? How do we fix it? And so I still like did good work, but I would take a little bit longer because of like the manual dexterity issue. But as far as troubleshooting and making plans, I was very good, which when you're moving up in the NCO ranks, that's actually much more important than the hands-on stuff tended to be. And so essentially my career culminated in me. Well, I say culminated, but for the last 3 years of my career, it looks like a cardiac arrhythmia where I went pro super specialist section chief, even though I was a crew chief, which I asked for. And then I basically was decided that I was too difficult in that role through the same commander that we're going to kind of talk about here. And then I moved to the support section, which is, I'm not trying to demean anybody that works in the support section, but typically that's where careers go to die. And I was in the support section for, I think, 3 weeks. And then I moved from the support section to the lead production superintendent of another unit, which I've never heard of anybody moving from the support section to be the lead pro super. And then after the whistleblower incident, I moved from lead pro super to expedite or to end of runway like supervisor, which I was taking over from a technical sergeant select. He was actually a staff sergeant when I was taking over from, and I was a seasoned master sergeant. So I always say my career culminated in lead pro super because that's where my highest sort of responsibility lies. But really, my career ended up in a small office in a building where I was essentially told, not told, but it was implied that I wouldn't be touching any jets and I wouldn't really be supervising anybody anymore for the last year of my career.
Just for our non-Air Force folks, what is pro super? And then can you describe a little bit your previous podcast? One of the things that I loved so tremendously was when they put you on the end of the runway as kind of a toss away, put this E7 over there, that you ended up being a little bit spicy and having a bit of fun, which is one of the reasons I liked you so much. And you were grounding aircraft, many aircraft, which so you became actually a burr in the side of the command that wanted to put you to the side. So can you describe those two things?
Yeah. So first of all, what we're going to kind of talk about here, this is going to kind of bookend the retaliation piece, because me moving to end of runway was for sure part of the retaliation.
Oh, for
Me
sure.
being a production superintendent, there's like two kinds. There's the production superintendent and lead production superintendent. The production superintendent is in charge of essentially orchestrating all the maintenance across all the Air Force specialty codes on shift in that unit for that shift. A little bit of forward looking for the week, maybe next week, and some long-term stuff, but mainly it's focused on, I want to make sure we fix as many jets as possible. We're really kind of prioritizing and using all of our resources, coordinating with other units, other production superintendents at other units that you might need their support. And the lead production superintendent is in charge of that production superintendent office. There's usually, one per shift, so there's 3 production superintendents, with some expediters kind of running the individual sorts of shops within that. And the lead production superintendent is really supposed to do 2 things. And I think most of the time, most lead supers only do one thing. The primary thing they're supposed to do is like set the maintenance strategy for the production office long term, which includes a lot more interfacing with operations, the director of operations. What does the flying side need? What can we do to compromise? What can we do long term? And also the director of operations or the DO kind of communicating, here's what we see on the horizon that maintenance needs to know about. So it's very like production oriented in preparing the fleet and anticipating. And then it's also the leadership aspect, which I think is often overlooked in those roles, which is not only am I leading 3 other master sergeants and maybe 12 tech sergeants, but also part of that is that relational stuff, the trust I'm building with operations, where if I say something, it needs to be honest. So that way I create a back and forth where they're only asking for what they need, and I understand that, and therefore I'm giving what I can, and I'm not withholding from them, and they're not overburdening me. So I think very often a lot of production superintendents and lead production superintendents, they kind of forget the leadership piece and that relational piece with ops, and they hyperfixate on just the maintenance management. And I tried to do both. I would like to think I was successful, but ultimately I had to leave that job.
And that's a huge job. I mean, that's massive. I mean, Ryan does all the cool stuff and flies the things, but if you aren't doing what you're doing, he's not getting anywhere.
Yeah,
And that's just the fact of the matter.
And also, like when I was doing it, I was in a training unit. We had a massive fighter pilot shortage and deficit. We were at Holloman Air Force Base, so our range, we had like one of the lowest priorities for the range. So we were constantly getting like these reflows and things like that. And then to also answer your second question about my spiciness at end of runway. So I essentially moved from lead production superintendent, where I was in charge of an entire unit's long-term maintenance planning and effort coordinating with ops and my unit leadership, to I was in charge of 3 airmen sitting in a truck in the middle of the desert staring at the runway for 10 to 14 hours a day. And my squadron chief, who was, I think, intimately involved in the reprisal and retaliation, directed that he wanted me to personally inspect aircraft that went through, because he was concerned that the personnel that were assigned to me at end of runway were like not doing what they were supposed to do. They were withholding findings. So here I was in the Air Force at this point for 18 years. My command knew that I had like a bad back condition, and they were expecting me to crawl all over around jets, running aircraft, and inspect them. So I did. And it turns out you don't put the really competent, smart mechanic who's also pissed off at how he's been treated as the sole gatekeeper for every F-16 sortie in a unit. And what I found is we had these excessive wingtip fuel leaks. And as Ryan is probably aware, TOs are kind of vague when it comes to what's serviceable or unserviceable, or I should say what's flyable. They will tell you what's serviceable and unserviceable, but very often it's left up to the discretion of the technician to decide whether the unserviceability is a safety of flight issue and therefore grounding. But unfortunately for Holloman Air Force Base, the technical order was explicit, saying the aircraft cannot be flown in this particular leak condition. And I don't remember off the top of my head, because again, it's been 8 or 9 years now, but I want to say it was like 6 drops per minute or 10 drops per minute from the wingtip. And some of these, it was outrageous. And so
you all can't see Ryan laughing over there, but Ryan's
yeah,
laughing his head off
every F-16 is like this.
Well, because all the pilots are just like, who cares? 6 drops, 1 drop, 3 drop, but all the technicians are like,
Yeah, and we had all kind of known about it, and there's also like a lot of pressure of letting things go. I think it's also from the ops side, but also certainly from the maintenance supervision side. Nobody wants to drop a line. Pilots don't want to show up with 6 drops per minute and now they can't fly type of deal. And so I didn't even like ground them at the outset. I started sending text messages to the production superintendents at each of the units that the F-16s going, hey, I want you to check tail number such and such and such and such. The wingtips are getting really bad, or the strake of the aircraft is getting really bad. And I had a friend working at the unit I had just come from as a lead pro super, and he was getting the jets slowly worked and getting them fixed. And I was texting another guy at the other unit, and he was blowing me off. And I gave it about a week and a half. And then I was like, well, I'm done with this. And it was like, the way I describe it in my blog post is I was like Caesar in the Gladiator, or I'm just like thumbs downing like every single jet. And kind of the fortunate or unfortunate result of that is, as Ryan's probably aware, whenever you're doing some particular training sorties, you might be able to lose one, or sometimes you can't lose any, depending on if it's the student's jet or somebody else's. So what I was doing was I was only shooting down. I think I only shot down maybe 7 or 8 jets, but we had what are called sympathy aborts, which if that jet can't go, then the other 3 can't go. So I think in that day, I had essentially impacted 50 to 60% of the scheduled sorties were canceled. And I think 8 or 9 of the jets went into long-term repair at fuel shops, so much so that there was a line out of the hangar of jets waiting. And also these fixes required multi-day cures. So it was like a long fix. And I think if I remember correctly, they had to bring in fuel personnel from another base just to shore up and go to a 24-hour op for just wingtip leaks. And I heard it through the grapevine. Do we cuss on this podcast?
Ryan does. My mother
Francesca does not. So, but you and I can. Absolutely.
So I essentially heard through the grapevine somebody say, why in the fuck do we put that guy in charge of every single F-16 sortie on this base? What the fuck were we thinking?
Yeah, because at that sort of maintenance readiness rate, that had to get briefed all the way up to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and the SecAF, which is kind of glorious. So that's a great transition, though. So you were reprised against all your skills, all your talents. They said, you know what, we're going to get rid of this guy and put him in a really dumb position, which is kind of amazing. So just briefly walk us through the scenario that we touched a little bit on it in your introduction, but walk us through the scenario a little bit more in depth, and then we'll really get into kind of the 4 major points that we wanted to cover in this podcast.
Yeah, so essentially what happened was I was a specialist section chief and I had a guy arrested, and I had gone to pick him up from jail, and I was like, hey, don't talk to anybody, go to the ADC. You're also going to need a civilian attorney. He was a really good guy, and I was really surprised that he had been arrested. But, it's also like, you never know sometimes. And I was meeting with my commander at the time, and I was essentially briefing him. And, it was a pretty serious charge. It was a felony off base. So if he was found guilty, your military career, if you get a felony, like you're going to prison, it's done.
Yeah, you're toast.
So it's almost like the Air Force effects is less material to what's going on in this guy's life. Like if he's found guilty, it's all going to just happen. And essentially about a month or 2 after he was arrested, he's working with his attorney. He was in ALS. He was kicked out of ALS, although I disagreed with why he was kicked out as well.
ALS is
Airman Leadership School. So he had a lot. He was anticipating becoming a staff sergeant, so he had to go through some leadership training. And in the leadership regs, it's very specific. If you are under investigation, an administrative release is appropriate, because if you're under investigation, we don't know if you did anything wrong, but instead they gave him a disciplinary release with no sort of due process or review, which is usually if it's a very egregious thing, like you punch an instructor and everybody saw it, there's no doubt that it was an error. But in this case, we don't even have the police report. We don't have anything.
Right.
But essentially, my section chief calendar was populated with hey, bring this guy in his blues on Monday. And so everybody knows that, when you're bringing a guy in blues, he's typically going to get some sort of punishment, administrative, judicial, or otherwise.
And blues, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, that's basically the fancy
The
uniform.
fancy uniform, which crew chiefs never, with maintainers never wear. We wear it for like awards sometimes, but mostly we wear it for getting in trouble. And that's usually how.
Right.
So like it creates this Pavlovian effect that the best looking uniform is the one that is most dreaded and most shame inducing. It's not a good model at all whatsoever. So he came in, and this commander had said very problematic things multiple times in those conferences before or after sort of these admin or personnel actions. Like, I got the sense that he thought he was in command of like a prison colony, and he was just waiting to catch all the people. Like, everyone's a criminal, I just haven't caught them yet, was the kind of mindset. And I attribute part of that to the fact that I think he's going on his third year of command, all aircraft maintenance. Like, there's a reason why they're kind of moved into command to get the experience and moved out. I think he got jaded. Like, I actually don't have any ill will towards this individual. I just think he was kind of set up for failure, both in not enough resources, everybody has to cut corners, and then also just kind of being jaded. So because it was legal under New Mexico law and the Air Force didn't have a policy and nothing in that meeting was classified or anything, I suspected this commander was once again going to say something that was problematic or toxic or something. So I set my cell phone to record the audio and kind of went in that room. And everyone in the room but me was essentially the commander was going to do a letter of reprimand and unfavorable information file, which for an enlisted person, that's going to cause like long-term impacts to their promotion.
Yep.
Enlisted kind of get letters of reprimand at varying levels. It's different for the officer class, but we kind of get them, and they don't necessarily, depending on what they are, have career impacts. But the fact that it was being also attached to an unfavorable information file means it was a formal personnel action that would go into a file. And also, I think, if I understand correctly, it would be coded against them on their digital personnel record as well, letting them know that this was essentially a black mark on the record. And I was concerned because we didn't have the police report. We didn't know anything. He hadn't been convicted. Nothing had moved in his civilian thing yet. And so everybody in the room, which was, I think, a first sergeant, two chiefs, and the commander, were all just given the thumbs up, the rubber stamp of approval. Yes, we should do this. And I was the only dissenting voice, which was, we should wait until what happens. Like, we don't know anything. We don't have
due
the
process.
Report. Yeah,
it's an amazing thing. Due process.
Let's wait. And the commander said, "Well, I'm worried about waiting because I don't want to forget." And I don't know if I said it. I don't know if I said it or I thought it, but it's like, you can just put it in your calendar. Like a reminder. I do it every day.
What did I have to do again? Oh, that's right. Screw that guy. All right.
Yeah, like
Jones, take a note.
And so they brought the guy in, and he starts talking to him. Or no, sorry, this was before he came in. He said, talking about the arrest and how he thought the arrest was enough to do this letter reprimand, LORUIF. And I said, I just don't think we should do anything. And he said, well, you know what? I've never been arrested. And I think where there's smoke, there's fire, which the implication was, if you've been arrested, you're guilty. Therefore, I feel ethical, legal, and moral to issue this administrative career action, even though all I know is I don't have the police report. All I know is my first sergeant was called at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning and given some information from a dispatch, and Chris went and picked him up and got him out of jail, and that's all I know.
Guilty.
Yeah. And so issued the letter reprimand UIF to the guy. And I had talked to that guy, and I had played for him the audio because I'm big on transparency. And also, I'm a firm believer you can record me anytime. I mean, I have a podcast. Clearly, you can record me anytime. And I wanted to let him know the precarious situation he was in, like, so we can go in eyes wide open. So I essentially played from the audio and let him know where his commander's mind was. And I asked him if he wanted to go hard in the paint on it, and I would back him up if he wanted to do like an Article 138, something for reprisal, or he wanted to go to IG. And essentially he's like, well, let's just sit on it for a bit. So big surprise, the charges off base were dropped because it was a false accusation. But the commander decided to leave the LOR on the guy's record.
Why?
And Why? Yeah, there's
Yeah.
not a good, I can't think of a good reason.
Do you think he just, supposition, I guess. Do you think he was just trying to want to save face?
Well, so I think he pulled the UIF portion, but left the LOR. It's almost like when you're playing roulette, you just want to put your chips everywhere. Because if you put them everywhere, one of those chips is probably going to be right. So I think he just wanted to leave the LOR because he thought something had happened. He also had intimated that he thought this airman had essentially like witness tampered or intimidated the witness to recant, or the complainant to recant. But so I think he just thought he was guilty. And at the time, the standard of proof for an LOR was essentially zero. At the time, it was commander should have the preponderance of evidence, but not must or shall. So essentially, it was full commander's discretion. And so essentially, I had that recording for another 6 months, and I didn't delete it mainly out of laziness. Like, the kid, his career was kind of rebounding, and there didn't need to be a use for it. And then in my role as a lead production superintendent, it was my first week in the seat. I saw that commander was dressed in his blues one day in the group building, and I had asked somebody, "Oh, what's he doing?" Like, "Oh, it's for a court martial." And I thought, and so as I'm driving home, like those little neurons in my brain are connecting. Like, wait a minute, court martial? Well, he's not. He's a group commander, like he's a deputy group commander. So like, he's not in trouble, I'm sure. Maybe he's a witness. I was like, I wonder if he's on the jury. And so I was like, well, if he's on the jury, and I just thought, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I'm like, and so
Yeah, he's predisposed.
yeah, like I don't know if I have a defect in my brain. Like as soon as I know there's a problem, if I don't do anything and there's a bad outcome from me not interjecting, I will feel personally responsible for that bad outcome because I didn't like do what I thought was supposed to be done. So I talked to a friend of mine who was at Holloman that night and asked him what his thoughts were. And he's like, man, you already know. So I called the Area Defense Council the next day and I said, hey, I think I have information about your court martial that's going on. And they said, the court martial for Sergeant so-and-so? I'm like, I don't know who it is. I don't know anything about it, but I think there's someone on your jury that is unfit. And I think I can prove it. We're like, well, come down to our office. And I came down and there was an attorney there. And I said, hey, single party consent in New Mexico, Air Force doesn't have official if it's not classified. So it falls under state. She's like, that's correct. And I said, I think this person's a jury member. She's like, yes, he is. And on this date, he said, when giving an LOR to a guy that was arrested, he said, in the context of if someone's arrested, if there's smoke, there's fire. I said, I think he is predisposed to assume guilt when anyone's arrested. And he left this LOR dangling anyway, even though the person was found innocent. And she said, well, they're doing closing arguments today, so we need to get over there. And so essentially he got over there, and I had the audio, and I kind of gave it to an audio tech, and I was under the impression that like it would be given to the, because I was naive, it would be given to the judge. He would get it. He would make a decision. It would be very like low key.
It's played full court.
Well, so that's part of like an open like process.
Yeah, it has
transparency
to be.
judicial system
It has to be.
So, in that recording, I am the loudest voice because the microphone is closest to me. I am the only dissenting voice in that room. So, like, I knew that if I give this up, I experienced genuine grief as I'm like writing the affidavit, not like for me. I knew I will never supervise someone in the Air Force ever again. Like I am, and this is for a stranger, but it's just like I couldn't stand by. And so actually while they were getting the audio like on a disc and getting it to the judge, I was in the hallway and my commander had walked right up to me and seen me. Like, so I'm out of my duty section where the trial is. And then 15 minutes later, the audio is played in open court. And the judge essentially says, during voir dire, you had said that you don't presume guilt over innocence, or words to that effect. I think it was implied. And the judge essentially said something to the effect of, I don't think you're biased, but now there's the appearance of bias and that can jeopardize these proceedings. So I'm going to have to excuse you. And then the judge essentially said, do not tell any, because I had written in my affidavit, I'm worried about reprisal. This is my commander. He was dual heading as a group commander and still as a squadron commander. And I had an active medical evaluation board being sent up that was still waiting on commander approval to retain me so I could do my 20 and retire. And he told them explicitly, do not tell anyone about why you were dismissed. Do not talk about the recording at all. And the commander kind of walked through the jury room, grabbed his stuff. Everybody was confused, and then he left. And I know this because I ended up voiding a lot of court documents, but he drove back to his office. Another jury member on that jury was in that maintenance group, came into his office, said, "Hey, what happened?" He said, "Chris McGee recorded me giving an LOR and saying a bunch of stuff and gave it to the court."
Oh my.
Gave it to the court martial.
So now we take the next step, the reprisal. So your commander at some point in this process, this is one of the major points that I know we wanted to hit for today's podcast. Your commander goes to the JAG and essentially asks the JAG, how can I reprise against this guy without looking like reprisal?
Yeah, so as soon as he was dismissed, the judge did say he was allowed to talk to JAG. And now also for people that are not in the military, you may not understand, like commanders exercise quasi-judicial authority through Article 15 sorts of things. And so I think what a lot of people miss is when a commander is found unfit to serve on a jury, which is a diluted judicial process, that's very much a threat to their perception of their impartiality or their bias as a commander as well, because there is no one else to check them essentially. And so it's going to create this ego, professional ego, personal ego, but also very much a defensiveness. And so the judge essentially said, hey, if you want to talk to JAG about your dismissal, if you have any questions, they're available to you. And so the reason why I know what he said to JAG was, which you would think normally I wouldn't, is because when he disclosed to that other jury member the day he was released back in his office, that jury member told the other jury members. And then when they came into court the next day, I'm not sure the exact exchange, but somebody asked the judge, I heard, the individual that was released because someone that worked for him played audio of him giving like private conversations, to which the judge asked, how did you hear about this? So they said, oh, well, it looks like. So then they brought that commander in that day for the beginnings of a contempt article.
Wow.
Like failure to follow a lawful order of a judge or magistrate. And so they levied charges against him.
Wow.
So through that contempt hearing is where I got all of my testimony from the JAG about what was said and what transpired afterwards. And so this is what struck me. Like if you, and I have it all on the blog, what strikes me is there is no one in this process that thinks I did anything moral or ethical at all whatsoever.
What do you mean by that?
Even the judge refers to me kind of contemptuously that I surreptitiously recorded that I was somehow a dishonest senior NCO, that I was disloyal to my commander. The JAG, so the majority of my commander going to the JAG, it was essentially what can I do to Chris? And the JAG's coaching was, hey, slow down. You don't want to do anything that's going to look like retaliation. I know you're really upset. You have every reason to be upset, but don't do anything now. Because if you do something now, it will look like retaliation. And so I was quite surprised at I think it's the boldness of it, I think is what's so striking. It's not even seen as coaching retaliation by the attorneys.
So you became for both the commander and the legal system, including even the judge, the magistrate, who's supposed to have overarching view of the fairness of the entire legal process. You then became a burden or a fly in the soup, a fly in the ointment of them wanting to just get this case over with, them wanting to move on to the next thing, and you became a burden. Is that pretty much what happened?
I don't think so. I think it was, I don't think it was about the case getting over with, because I think closing arguments happened the next day and then the case was decided. And also I'd like to point out the individual that was accused was found innocent. I think that's also an important thing to maybe include in the fact pattern. But also, to me, it was immaterial whether he was guilty or innocent, because this had everything to do with the integrity of the legal process. But this had everything to do with the integrity of the legal process. So I think there was animosity that because of my actions, it forced their hand on removing him. And then again, it forced their hand on doing this contempt hearing. I think nobody wanted to be engaged in this hearing, but the facts were undeniable that it had to be done. And so I was the linchpin for all of it. And I had done something deceptive. And we're not going to explore why I would have done that, right? Did I just happen to pick that one time that happened to capture something toxic and like problematic for a commander to say? No, I'd been in lots of conversations where he said toxic and problematic things I hadn't captured. Also, there was a hyperfixation on me recording and not looking at the contents. So much so that right after this, then I got notified that I was under a Privacy Act investigation for violating privacy. Now, both Ryan and Seska, you've been in the military. If someone's issuing an LOR and it is protected by the Privacy Act, simple question, whose privacy is being protected? The one receiving the LOR or the commander giving the LOR?
Should be the recipient.
Correct. And the recipient heard the recording the day of. He heard it start to finish, right? And so I get a retaliatory Privacy Act investigation without the person whose privacy was quote unquote violated even knowing or complaining. Who then he was nice enough, since I saved his career, to write me essentially, I release all privacy interests in this LOR in any derivative. And I had hip pocketed that. And I had to go to the ADC and get an attorney. And he's like, this is great, Chris, because this essentially, removes any privacy claims at all whatsoever. But it was, we are going to pull the administrative levers to go after Chris immediately. And this is where I always see commanders like circling the wagon of, I've always seen it, especially as an enlisted person, that somehow there's this moral, ethical, and judgmental transformation when someone goes from like a non-command role into a command role, where there's so much deference to that commander, they can do no wrong. And so as soon as it was heard, oh, Chris recorded this commander, all the commanders were offended at the recording, but not at the contents of the recording, which is exceptionally problematic. And every commander should be upset over another commander presuming guilt that way.
Well, you've hit on two major themes that we see time and time again in the IG realm, at least, and also the legal realm, because it's the axis of evil, right? There's all this act of collusion now. The first golden rule is you question the sanctity of command, right? We see that as a psychological response to every whistleblower, every complainant, every Article 138 filer. How dare you question my authority, yep. Right? And then it's put into the court of the judge advocate or the inspector general, and they have basically a mutually exclusive decision, which is to really serve out their loyalty to truth and justice, or serve the loyalty of the command. And a lot of times they are mutually exclusive. Your story is no different, right? It is either, okay, what is correct by letter of the law, holistically, or how can I placate my commander and get to yes? And those two elements we see so many, maybe all of the cases we work with, which is like, hey, I am filing an IG complaint. I am filing 138. Like, how dare he do that, right? And that was exactly the psychological reaction to what you did. Truth be damned, and the why and what was recorded and everything behind that be damned, right? This guy's a boat rocker. JAG, IG, FOIA, Privacy Act guys, it's time to circle the wagons and crush that guy. It is a pattern we see time and time and time again.
So follow up, Ryan, you talked about the duality of like justice and integrity versus loyalty to the commander or the command. Of those two conflicting camps, which one impacts the IG's career and promotion?
Exactly. Yeah. As long as you are placating your master, you are going to succeed, right? You are going to progress. And the Judge Advocate General Court is exactly in the same conundrum. You talk to judge advocates nowadays, and it is, I mean, their future is in their boss's hand. And the boss judges them not on their impartiality and their loyalty to justice and due process. It's to get in the yes. It's to backing him up or colluding with him. And the same is true with the IG system. It is wrought with conflicts of interest, and the cost is justice.
So I'm kind of curious, what was the actual advice that the JAG gave? Did they give the commander any specific advice on actions that he could take against you to cover up his misdeeds?
Yeah. So, what's ironic is all of this testimony comes because they were trying to determine what this commander had spoken to who about when. And so they were trying to go, did he go to JAG and ask what he could talk about? Like, because essentially this was beyond hilarious. First of all, there was a few things. This commander had said to the first sergeant at one time, if someone gets an attorney, we're going to punish them harder. But if they give a statement to OSI, we'll go easy on them. Right. So there was also the perception
this is the same commander.
Same commander. Again.
Oh my.
Like he exercises his rights. Oh man, it is so odd.
Yeah, like it's not that I had just happened to record the one time he said something toxic. It was a real pattern of very concerning things. But what's funny is it created and I think that's probably why the LOR stayed on the one guy, because he sought legal representation. So like it's what could say. What I thought was exceptionally funny is this commander, he got attorney for his contempt proceedings.
There's no hypocrisy like hypocrisy.
And
so good.
You're not going to believe what his defense was. He claimed, I didn't understand your instructions not to talk about this.
Oh my. Oh my.
To which point the judge said, essentially after all the evidence was given, the judge says, I don't understand.
Is the contempt hearing, right?
It is a contempt hearing. So the issue was, I told you not to discuss why you're released. You immediately went back and discussed it. So now I'm bringing here because it's a contempt, right? And so the judge said, I don't understand. This was very well worded. He said, I spoke to you in your native language of English.
That's so good.
Asked you if you understood, and you responded in the affirmative.
Oh, that's amazing.
And now you're saying you don't understand. He said, if you had given an order like this as a commander, you would assume they understood your order.
And yet the same judge is still saying what a terrible guy you are because you recorded the conversation.
Yeah, so kind of going back to what the JAG had kind of advised. So the way it shook out was he walked out of the courtroom, he walked right over to the JAG office. Now also recognize this isn't him walking in and meeting the JAG for the first time. He's a commander. He's been interfacing with these JAG officers for, at this point, 2 years. They know him as one of their guys. Like a commander isn't going to JAG to be told no. He's going to JAG to find solutions to his quote unquote legal problems. And they're working hand in hand for him to do Article 15s and refer things and things like that. So he was seeking their advice on what he could do. And essentially what they said was he didn't talk anything at all about his release. He only talked about the legality of what Master Sergeant McGee did and what he could do to him. To which they said, and during that, I'm reading directly, this is testimony from the attorney in the contempt hearing about the nature of that conversation. They said, and during that meeting, a lot of it was focused around that recording and retaliation. At one point, another attorney was kind of playing devil's advocate about what potentially it could do to the NCO that brought this forward. And then they later said, and we wanted to discuss with him what actions he should or should not take, because there was a concern that if he did anything to the master sergeant who recorded him, it could be perceived or complained about as reprisal or retaliation. And they said, we wanted to make sure that the government doesn't retaliate or reprise unduly, which also indicates there's duly reprisal and retaliation.
Well, yeah. I mean, when the judge himself is saying you're contemptible for, yeah, of course.
So they said, so when the commander came in the room, we talked to him about the concern over whether or not action that he might take or do going forward might be considered reprisal or retaliation. So it's interesting that that was the sole focus of the conversation. And he said, this just happened and I want to do X. There is not a clearer line for retaliation at all whatsoever.
Get me to yes. Get me to yes.
Yeah, and they're like,
that's basically what he said.
We always say it's so difficult to prove reprisal because basically the culprit has to admit it or say it out loud, and he did.
Yeah, correct.
And you have court testimony that says he did. So, right?
Yeah.
Unsubstantiated.
So we were going to get to that a little bit later, but my curiosity just can't handle it. I'm imagining you filed a reprisal complaint. And was it substantiated or unsubstantiated?
So I didn't file the reprisal. So here's what happened, like, functionally. So
okay.
This all happened my first week as a lead pro super.
Oh my.
So like the job is hard. I made the job 1,000 times harder because also
you have a conscience.
No, I mean, that's not why. What made it 1,000 times harder was he immediately told everyone in the maintenance group what I had done. So I was a pariah.
Oh, that's good.
And his squadron chief, who was like sarcastically, romantically loyal to him to a point, was essentially, he was the person camping out on me for everything I did in my role as a lead pro super. And it was, they knew I didn't like the job because my stress levels was high. I was geo-batching, so I was 500 miles away from my family. It was at Holloman Air Force Base. I had the MEB going over. Like, I was under a lot of stress. I was also taking over for somebody where an office was struggling. We had the fighter pilot shortage. We had manpower and experience shortages. It would have been very, very difficult and stressful without like the scrutiny that I was under. And was very awkward is I had to brief that commander every afternoon at 3 p.m., which for the first week, it was actually really cool, because if you've ever been like in a 3 o'clock maintenance meeting where as a lead super, you have to explain everything that happened today. The thing that you worry about is all these follow-up questions, you not having answers to the follow-up questions. But what was nice was the seething rage of that commander at the disloyalty made him incapable of looking at me or asking me any questions or referring to me by name. So I was just sailing through.
So you were good
because he was trying to will me into a heart attack. So what ended up happening is they basically just kept turning the screws to me. And this is where that retaliation disconnect kind of comes in. Outside the fact that there's all these documents saying he was just trying to ask what he could do to retaliate for this. Essentially, it was nothing I did was ever good enough. Everything was picked apart. Everything was sort of undermined. And everyone in my leadership was like giving me a 10-foot berth because I was radioactive within this entire group. So there was no support. There was no backup, even though I was like, I had turned around nearly every metric. I think I was there for 2.5 months. I had turned around every metric. And really the straw that broke the camel back was that chief called me up on a Friday. And I had really gotten my fleet healthy. And he had said, hey, I see you have some little bit of room in your schedule. And he wanted me to do some exceptionally frivolous maintenance that would be very labor intensive for my guys. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And he said, no, you understand. I'm telling you. I'm like, this is my schedule. This is between me and ops. I sign it. My ops guy signs it. The commander signs it. If you don't like it, you can talk to them and you can maybe have them come back. But no, I am not changing anything I'm doing. And he said, well, okay, well, I'm going to call your captain. And I said, okay. And I hung up and I walked over to my captain's office and I said, I quit. And his phone starts ringing. He said, well, why do you quit? I'm like, well, pick up the phone and then you'll have your answer. And he picked it up and I hear, yes, chief. Yes, chief. Yes, chief. And then he hangs up and he goes, is there anything we can do? I'm like, no. I am.
You're like, put me on the end of that runway.
I said, I am not going to do something that I know has no benefit for the mission and is only going to beat down my people. You guys can treat me like crap, but I will not be somebody. Like, I ask my people to do a lot of things because it's necessary. I will never ask them to do something that is just out of spite, and also recognizing that It could be the disdain and contempt for me. I didn't say this, but I thought about it later. It could be the disdain and contempt for me might be transitioning down into my people. Like they were trying to hurt me and they were going to my people to do it. I said, I won't do it. And what was really funny was I was like, I quit. So we didn't do it that week. And then I came in on Monday. They didn't have a job for me. I just sat at my desk and I had like my scheduler turn around and go, Sergeant McGee, do you want to look at the schedule? I'm like, I don't work here. And I literally just took everything off my desk and I put it in a box and I just sat and I waited. And it was like 2 or 3 days later, I just come in and sit all day long. And then there was no lead super at all whatsoever. At this point, they're trying to figure out the schedule. I wasn't going to meetings anymore.
So here's a question. So you had all these screws put to you, up to and including them wanting to punish your team in order to punish you. So you also had a commander that went before or had a contempt of court charge levied against them and had a hearing for contempt of court. What sort of screws did his senior command level put to him?
So the timing of this, where it's all fluid. So his contempt didn't happen, I think, until a month after I had moved out of the position, which means also I didn't have all this testimony at this moment in time. Like I knew there was retaliation. I knew that I was in grave risk. At this point, I knew there was a Privacy Act investigation against me. That one cleared relatively quickly. It was really ironic. They said, can you give us the recording that violated the privacy? I said, I'm not going to answer that question. And then they said, we can't prove that he has a recording. So therefore, there's nothing here. So I didn't have all this. And so there was no screws. I would say there was no screws ever put against this commander. And I can really unpack that later. But yeah, all the screws are happening the next day. That moment on, the error was completely different in that unit everywhere.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think you had told me that commander ended up continuing on with his career, was promoted. I think he took more command. Is that right?
Yeah. So when this stuff popped off, he was the deputy group commander, because this was a weird, like a hybrid group. It was a fighter group. So it's like ops and maintenance kind of molded into one group because of the size. And so you had deputy group commanders that were essentially in charge of certain aspects. In this case, he was a deputy group commander for maintenance. And so, yeah, like he had taken that over. He didn't get a grade promotion, but he certainly got a responsibility promotion. Although it could be argued that a deputy group commander is no longer doing Article 15s and personnel actions. And if he's a toxic, abusive leader, then it actually might be a better position for him to be in, because in fairness, he actually was quite maintenance savvy. He was a smart guy.
But he continued on, you got moved, and then you got put at the end of the runway.
Yeah. So when I said I quit, it was essentially I expected to move back into a section. In hindsight, now I recognize they were never going to put me back in charge of a section because I wouldn't be trusted with supervising people. What was ironic was their crew chief section in that unit, I was a lead production superintendent. They were struggling and they were really looking forward to me coming in and kind of working on them, which I was happy to do. And then they finally made all these personnel decisions and they told me I was going to EOR super. And I was just completely blown away at how, I guess, petty, but also like there's a bit of admiration for how dirty they got. Like I didn't think it would, I always thought I would at least be doing a master sergeant role, even if it was support or something like really terrible. And then they slimmed me down to take over from a staff sergeant. And I was like, okay, gloves are off, clearly. And I kind of pushed back against it, but there's not much you can do. And so I reported to EOR, and I think I went to file my IG complaint, I think a week or two later. Essentially what I did was, first of all, I polled, because I was told as a master sergeant, I need to be personally inspecting the aircraft. So I polled every single F-16 EOR in the Air Force to ask what was the rank of their EOR section chief and what were their responsibilities to include, were they expected to personally inspect aircraft? Because I wanted to show I am being treated different from all of the other EOR supervisor peers. Came back with actually some of them.
And what is EOR?
End of runway. So
okay,
got it. Final inspection on aircraft before it takes off. We didn't have like an EOR building. So when we used the bathroom, we would either wait until the jets taxied out or go find a bush to go behind. I guess it's kind of good we didn't have any women maintainers while I was there, because I'm not sure what the facilities would have been in that case.
A bush.
Right. Fair. And so I went to IG and I brought all of this. I didn't have this testimony about literally the discussion of reprisal, but I didn't even get to go to my local IG because we were located at Holloman, but we were under the command of Luke Air Force Base. So I actually went to Luke Air Force Base, but my family was there, so it was kind of worth the trip. And Ryan, I don't know if I ever told you this. You're going to love this part, or it's going to steal a few years off your life. So I explained, I said, here's all my evidence, da, 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 da. And this was on, I think, a Saturday, because that's when I was there, which was great that he came in and met me on a Saturday. And I had all these documents and all these emails and all these sorts of things about how other EOR supers were behaving and things. And I was like, hey, I went from a lead production superintendent, which is the most promotable job for a master sergeant, to now I'm an EOR super turnover from a staff sergeant. Like, that is a career impact. It's a downgrade. And he said, well, you quit. So, and I said, okay, that's a fair point. This is the part that's going to hurt your soul, Ryan.
Oh.
He took my papers, he stamped them all like evidence received from complainant, like this little stamp. And he said, you know, our copier's not working. Do you mind driving these back to Holloman, scanning them and emailing them to me? That should have been a really good, like, first clue that this was not going to go well.
This is, yeah. How to say I don't give an F without saying I don't give an F.
Yeah. So essentially they came back, I think like 2 or 3 weeks later, and said, we're not even going to open the investigation, because I talked to some of my F-16 crew chiefs friends, and they said, it is possible for you to get promoted. So therefore, your move from lead pro super to EOR was not a career impact.
Favorable. Yeah.
And I said, okay, so what would be, because I moved from a master sergeant position to a staff sergeant position. I said, what if I was put in a snack bar where I was mopping floors? They said, no, that would be okay too. I said, you're saying if I move from a lead production superintendent running an entire fleet of F-16s worth over $1 billion to mopping floors in that unit, that would not be a career impacting reprisal? No, it would not. I'm like, okay, so there's no career, there's no reprisal doesn't exist at that point. Yeah.
And what was their response?
Well, I mean, I'm sure I was sassy, so they just wanted to get off the phone as quick as possible.
Shocking.
It so does exist. It so does.
At a rate of 1.7% of the time. Did you see that? Did you see that, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
Ryan's post today on LinkedIn. So apparently the DoDIG put out their numbers of complaints versus numbers of, that they investigated versus numbers that were substantiated. And that was just for reprisal, wasn't it, Ryan?
Yeah, it was reprisal and restriction.
Yeah. And they did somehow they did some DoDIG cheetah flip math and came up with a 15% substantiation rate. But really, when you actually do the math, not cheetah flip math, it's a 1.7% substantiation rate. So they just published that on their own. Like, hey, here's our 1.7% substantiation. It's like, good job, DoDIG.
I mean,
good job.
We really suck, guys.
I mean, even you said their made up number was 15%.
Yeah,
that's still
that's
awful.
Terrible.
That's awful.
It's awful. It's awful. I mean, even at 15%.
If you're gonna lie, make it good, right?
Right.
70%.
Even at 15%, you're still saying that 85%. Am I doing my math right? 85% of all complainants are bloody freaking liars, or can't read a regulation to save their life. It's just
you could
insane.
have been promoted sweeping floors.
I mean, come on.
Correct.
The Air Force gods could have come down. So what happened next then? Now you're in the runway, you're an EOR guy. The IG comes back and says, no big deal. You could have been promoted. So what happens next?
So then I grounded the fleet, and they were like, fuck.
So good.
So I guess that was my reprisal. My reprisal against their reprisal.
I see your reprisal.
Yeah, it was just an escalation, really.
Chris, that was not reprisal. You were just doing your duty to the taxpayer money and all of those pilots. You wanted to make sure they were safe. That's the story I would have told. But I'm
well, in fairness, like it was a by the book,
exactly.
100% by the book, clean, this is wrong. So like, and I gave like warning, this needs to be fixed. But
Right.
What also I think they really, and I think what they really never understood about me was somewhere around when I was a pro super and I asked, and I was being groomed for lead super, and I would have probably made E8 and E9. You just basically don't get a DUI or sexually harass somebody, and you live in those roles long enough, and you'll just get promoted. I realized I just didn't care about promotion anymore. And I put my money where my mouth was. And I said, can you move me into a section? I'd like to do the spec section. And that was a challenge for me because I was not a avionics person. I was a crew chief. So it took a lot of learning. And I couldn't go to a meeting and be like, I don't know, because I'm a crew chief. Be like, you asked for this. You need to be able to answer these questions. So really broaden my horizons. And so what I also realized through my last 3 years is the Air Force and probably the military overall, they have one trick. They have one carrot, and it's promotion. And when you no longer like that carrot, or you care about that carrot, their toolkit to motivate you and to get you to do what they want you to do as a puppet is completely empty. And when you have truly let go of your promotion, you are the freest you will ever be, and your agency and power exceeds those of higher rank. I sat in meetings and looked people dead in the eye and said, I'll go to the group commander and tell them what's going on here if we don't do it my way. I was literally the most powerful person in the room, and I was one of the lowest ranking person in the room because I held the moral high ground in many conversations because everybody else was compromising their morals for their careers because they're still chasing that carrot. I was the only non-vegetarian in that room, and I was eating my meat for sure.
Yep.
So essentially, then when all these ground aborts happened, then they were afraid of reprisal because I had already gone. I think they probably already got wind I had gone to IG, because actually when I had gone to IG for something else, the IG called my commander and said, hey, Chris McGee was down here asking questions about something you're doing. And then like, swear to God. And he asked me, Chris, you been going to IG? I was like, yeah, I had a question about like the legality of what you're doing. He's like, what'd you find out? This is on something else. I said, it turns out you're legal. It's not ethical. It's not moral, but it's legal. So we can do it. So I already knew IG would kind of tell him what was going on. And so then they were afraid of reprisal. So I had a friend kind of come up to me and be like, hey, do you want to come work for quality assurance? You'll be in charge of like process improvement and the technical orders. You'll just be in an office. You'll be super chill. I was like, oh, that sounds pretty good. He's like, well, we're worried that it's going to look like reprisal if we move you again. So are you going to make a reprisal IG complaint if we move you? But you're talking about, I'm literally a homeless senior NCO living in the desert in a truck, going into an office with like, something that's at least meaningful. I was like, yeah, I'll take that. So I moved into an office, and I basically was just left to rot and die for the last year of my career.
And then you retired.
And then in this time, I also did the FOIA request for this, and that's when I saw like the reprisal. So if anybody's curious, that commander was found guilty of contempt.
I'll be damned.
What? Really?
And the judge said because of his exemplary career, no punishment will be levied upon him at all whatsoever.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a trial worth having.
And then I found out through another FOIA request 3 years later that he had petitioned to the numbered Air Force to get it expunged, and they granted it. So never mind.
So he was convicted in a federal court of contempt.
Correct.
Then he reprised against you.
Mm-hmm.
He got not a grade promotion, but a position promotion.
Mm-hmm.
And then that federal conviction was reversed.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably an SES somewhere in the bowels of the Pentagon doing something terrible to people.
I don't know what he's.
That's my ad lib on the end, or is it DA in the DAS or something?
I don't know what he's doing now.
We gotta have this guy on the show. I mean, this guy's a legend.
What's also a little bit amazing, Chris, and we're getting close on time, is you had said earlier, if you have a federal conviction for anything, your military record, your service is over, right? So let's go back. He was convicted of contempt of court, which means he had a federal conviction.
He did.
Was his career over?
So
no.
I think I said if he had a felony conviction, this was not a felony level like the contempt. I think the UCMJ, like the sentencing guidelines, would have, if he had to classify, it would have been at a misdemeanor. He retired. He didn't do a retirement ceremony, which for him, I think was pretty substantial. I know this might sound like it's inconsequential, but like if you knew him, like yeah, it hurt. And again, even through all this, I actually don't think he's I don't think there's many bad people out there on the planet, honestly. I think, the sociopaths are like 1% of the population. I think everybody else is just trying to make do in a really screwed up environment. And there's biases and echo chambers that reinforce bad behaviors. And then you ego protect and cling to it. I think this person's a perfectly good person that just had like a really bad experience and made some bad decisions. And I attribute a lot of his bad decisions to there were not more Chris McGee's with him in the room for all these other things going, you're wrong. And I'm not sure where telling someone they're wrong, no matter, and I didn't say hands on the hips, I think you're wrong, stupid. It was, I disagree, I think we should wait. It was the counsel as a commander you expect from your seasoned senior NCOs that have a different perspective.
And your JAGs, really.
Yeah, also your JAGs, but I think, like you pointed out, I think JAGs are always trying to get to yes, I think is the reality. So he retired, and I think he didn't do a ceremony. I think that spoke a lot to it. I don't think he would come on your show, and no, I don't think he would ever talk to me again. I wish I could, but like not to, it was kind of like, it's just business. Like it wasn't personal. It wasn't against him, even though, like I said, he had said many things that were problematic. It was, I'm worried that you're unfit for this role as a jury member, and it's going to put someone in prison. And that's more important than your ego. And that's more important than my career. It ended up being, that was true, because my career was tanked and his ego was shattered.
But also, and we wrote about this in one of our DoD Times Redacted articles, A Tale of Two Courages, is in the quote that opens the article is, we reward your courage when you kill or die for us, but we censure it when you question us. And that's really what you did. You exhibited an incredible amount of moral courage to speak up against the protectorate, the institution, when you knew what was right and what was wrong, and they summarily crushed you for it.
But in fairness, I walked in eyes wide open, so I knew what was going to happen. And we'll put a bow on it, right after I had got dropped off from signing the affidavit saying this is the audio and giving the audio to the judge, the first ADC I met with in that office that day that drove me over to the trial so we could do all this evidentiary work, she said, hey, if you need like a letter of recommendation or something, or a character reference, just let me know. And I was so naive. I said, well, what would I need a character reference for? She's like, in case they do anything. So like, even in that moment, he knew there was going to be retaliation and reprisal. I just think it's wild.
Well, that's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for Chris for coming on the show and for sharing those experiences and re-highlighting once again the collusion between all of the different arms that support the commander, the IG, the
lapdogs,
JAG,
if you will.
The lapdogs, the IG, the JAG, the EO, maybe even the magistrate, although maybe not necessarily. Although there might have been a little bit of UCI, like, this guy's despicable. How dare he record anything? So before we sign off, any closing words?
It's more of, I did an episode with one of my mentors, Elton Madden. So if you look at my podcast, it's tabled Do What Your Stripes Can Handle. And when I was a young tech sergeant, I was very brash and headstrong. And sometimes I would be getting close to a line where if I crossed that line, there might be some really bad career impacts. And my boss at the time, Elton Madden, would say, Chris, do what your stripes can handle, which I always appreciated, because in maintenance, there was always a lot of micromanaging and like helicopter supervisory stuff. And he was like, if you want to do it, but just don't be surprised if you go too far and it costs you a stripe. And when I did that podcast with him, I realized do what your stripes can handle is a dual purpose phrase. It's don't go so far that you jeopardize everything, but also you should not live in comfort. You should do what your stripes can handle. You should do up to that limit. You should advocate for, you should push for the betterment. You should use your agency, power, and authority where you can, when you can. And I think a lot of people are so afraid of making waves that they never do what their stripes can handle. They don't know the potential of what they can do. And I think collectively that, and I don't use the word lightly, that cowardice of being bold and making it better, I think is a degradation across all levels of the DoD, across all branches.
100% agree. Ryan, did you have any closing thoughts?
Well, Chris, it's fun to have you on. It's been about 2+ years now. I think it's March of 23. You had me on 20 Years Done. It's one of the first podcast interviews I'd ever done after I had made some waves within the DoD as well on my way out and started the foundation. And it's cool to see how you've progressed, not only from a haircut perspective, but how far you've come in terms of your career and what you're doing now and advocating and fighting the good fight. So I very much appreciate that, but also how you helped launch my second phase, professionally speaking, in Walk the Talk. And now here we are 2 years later and have made some serious inroads into some very systemic and very significant issues afflicting the DoD, like the leadership culture and like the axis of evil of the JAG and the IG. So I want to say thank you for having the faith in believing in what I stood for and that message 2+ years ago, to have me on and use that as a kind of springboard for myself as well as for your platform. So it's good to have you back and bring it full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Like, I think people don't know about that whistleblower and the retaliation and stuff until you've kind of been through it. And then you get to see what it's like. So obviously, because of my experience, as cartoonish as like the villains were almost completely cartoonish, like the bag of money with dollar signs on it, I think I wouldn't have understood how important your foundation was or the work that you were doing. And also spotting in your story. Like, again, it seems nearly universal. Very rarely do you find whistleblowers are reacting to some sort of thing. It's almost fully intrinsic, a moral imperative to stand up at risk to do this. Yes. And I think that's also why the DoD has such a problem with it, because you can't spot your moral people walking amongst us. They look like everybody else, and that's very difficult for them.
Well, that was fantastic closer. Chris, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day up there you're in Maine, right? Up in Portland, Maine?
I am.
That's fantastic. I hope the weather's slightly cooler than it is down here in the swamp that is Arlington, Virginia. And on that note, I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Bye. Well, that's it for this week's topic. We really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and check out our foundation website at walkthetalkfoundation.org.
And feel free to reach out and give us feedback. You can get a hold of us via Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and our foundation's website. Details in the description section. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next episode.